You're standing in a supermarket. You reach out and grab a bottle of olive oil from the shelf. Spanish olives, pressed in Seville, bottled in Barcelona. Sitting in a supermarket in Tokyo or Toronto or Sydney. You don't think twice about it. But stop for a moment. How did that bottle get here? Not the truck that drove it from the warehouse. Not the plane that... Actually, no. It didn't come by plane. It came by sea. In a metal box stacked on top of dozens of other metal boxes. On a ship the size of a small town. And the reason that bottle costs $3 instead of $30 has almost nothing to do with the olives, the pressing, or the bottling. It has everything to do with a single idea that one man had in 1956. An idea so simple that when he first proposed it, the entire shipping industry laughed at him. They're not laughing anymore. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the container. How a standard metal box rewired global trade, collapsed the cost of moving goods across oceans, created the world you shop in today, and why without it, the phone in your pocket would cost 3 times what you paid for it. If you're ready, let's begin.
To understand what the container changed, you first need to understand what shipping looked like before it existed. Go back to 1950. A cargo ship is docked at the port of New York. Hundreds of workers swarm the dock. Longshoremen, they're called. Strong men, skilled men, men who knew the waterfront like the back of their hand. Their job was to load the ship, and loading a ship in 1950 was an extraordinarily complex operation. Every piece of cargo was different. Crates of machinery, barrels of wine, bolts of fabric, bags of coffee. Each one had to be individually carried, lifted, swung by crane, and carefully wedged into the ship's hold, like a 3-dimensional puzzle reassembled from scratch every single voyage. A medium-sized cargo ship might take a week to unload and another week to load. 2 weeks just sitting in port, not moving, not earning. And during those 2 weeks, the cargo itself was extraordinarily vulnerable. Theft was rampant, rain damaged goods left on the dock, rough handling broke fragile items. Insurance rates were punishing because the risks were real. There was a saying among shipping companies at the time: a ship earns money at sea, not in port, and their ships were spending half their lives in port. Nobody had a solution. This was simply how shipping worked, had always worked, would always work. Or so everyone thought.
In 1953, a trucking entrepreneur from North Carolina named Malcolm McLean was sitting in his truck, waiting at the port of Hoboken, New Jersey. He was waiting for his cargo to be unloaded from his truck, transferred to the dock, and eventually loaded onto a ship. The process was taking hours. He watched the longshoremen moving individual crates, one by one, back and forth across the dock. And a thought crossed his mind. What if you didn't unload the truck at all? What if the entire trailer just went onto the ship? What if the box stayed sealed from the moment it was packed until the moment it arrived at its destination? It sounds obvious in hindsight. Most revolutionary ideas do. But in 1953, this idea was considered absurd. Ships were not built to carry uniform boxes. Ports were not equipped to handle them. Cranes were the wrong size. The entire infrastructure of global shipping was designed around the old system. More importantly, the people who ran that system didn't want it to change. The longshoremen's unions were powerful. They employed hundreds of thousands of workers. A system that could load a ship in hours instead of weeks was an existential threat to their livelihoods. The shipping companies were skeptical. Retooling ships cost money, rebuilding ports cost money, and for what? An unproven idea from a trucking man who knew nothing about ships? McLean spent 3 years being ignored, dismissed, and talked out of his idea by nearly everyone he met. He did it anyway.
On April 26, 1956,
A converted World War II tanker called the Ideal X left the port of Newark, New Jersey. On its deck sat 58 metal containers, each one 35 feet long, each one sealed, each one identical. The ship sailed to Houston, Texas. When it arrived, a crane lifted each container off the deck and placed it directly onto a waiting truck. No unpacking, no repacking, no longshoremen manually shifting individual items. The contents of each box hadn't been touched since they were loaded back in New Jersey. The entire operation took a fraction of the time a conventional cargo operation would have taken. McLean had calculated the cost. Loading cargo the old way cost approximately $5.83 per ton. Loading a container cost 16 cents per ton. $5.83 versus 16 cents. The industry didn't need a second demonstration. Within a decade, containerization had begun reshaping every major port in the world.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. A box is just a box. What made the container revolutionary wasn't the box itself. It was the agreement to make every box the same. In 1961, the International Organization for Standardization, the ISO, established a global standard for container dimensions. The most common became 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall. This is where the term TEU comes from, 20-foot equivalent unit, the basic unit of modern global trade. Think about what this standard actually means. A container packed in a factory in Shenzhen, China, fits perfectly onto a truck in Shenzhen. That truck drives to the port of Shanghai. A crane purpose-built to lift that exact container size picks it up and places it on a ship. The ship crosses the Pacific. At the port of Los Angeles, another crane built to the same specification lifts it off. Another truck drives it to a warehouse. Another crane unloads it. Not a single measurement had to be negotiated at any point in that journey. Every piece of infrastructure along the way was built around a single number, 20 feet. This is the hidden genius of containerization. It wasn't just a better box. It was a universal language that every port, every crane, every ship, every truck in the world now speaks fluently.
As containerization took hold, something inevitable happened. If containers were the unit of trade, then more containers meant more trade. And more containers meant bigger ships. In 1956, the Ideal X carried 58 containers. By the 1970s, ships were carrying a few thousand. By the 1990s, tens of thousands. Today, the largest container ships carry over 24,000 TEU. To put that in perspective, the largest container ships today are longer than 4 football fields placed end to end. They are so wide that they cannot fit through the original Panama Canal. When these ships are fully loaded, they displace more water than a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. And they are crewed by roughly 25 people. 25 people. Managing a floating city the size of several city blocks, crossing the Pacific Ocean, carrying enough goods to fill a large shopping mall.
This ratio, this extraordinary relationship between the size of the vessel and the size of its crew, is only possible because of automation, GPS navigation, and the beautiful simplicity of a standardized box that requires no human judgment to handle. Every crane knows exactly what to do with it. Every ship knows exactly where to put it. Every truck knows exactly how to carry it.
The container revolution created enormous wealth, but it also created costs that rarely appear in the official story. The workers who lost their jobs when containerization arrived at their ports were not given generous retraining packages or comfortable transitions. They were simply left behind. Entire working-class communities in New York, Liverpool, Rotterdam, and dozens of other port cities lost their economic foundations within a generation. The environmental cost is also staggering. Global shipping produces roughly 3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. That might sound modest until you realize that if the shipping industry were a country, it would be the 6th largest emitter on Earth.
sitting between Japan and Germany. Container ships burn a particularly dirty form of fuel called bunker fuel, the thick sulfurous residue left over after the refining of crude oil. For decades, ships burned this fuel with almost no environmental regulation because they were operating in international waters where no single country's laws applied. Only in recent years has serious international pressure begun to force the industry toward cleaner fuels and more efficient operations.
So where does all of this go next? The container system is not standing still. Several forces are pushing it toward transformation. The first is decarbonization. The shipping industry has committed to reducing its carbon emissions dramatically by 2050. This means transitioning away from bunker fuel toward alternatives like ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, and eventually perhaps wind-assisted propulsion. The rotor sails we discussed in our previous video are part of this story. The transition will be expensive, slow, and enormously complex, but it is underway. The second force is automation. The most advanced container terminals in the world today are almost entirely automated. Automated cranes, automated guided vehicles moving containers across the terminal, remote operations centers where a handful of technicians oversee operations that once required hundreds of workers. The Port of Rotterdam's Maasvlakte 2 terminal operates largely without human hands touching the containers at all. The third force is resilience. After the pandemic and the Ever Given, governments and companies began asking uncomfortable questions about the concentration and fragility of global supply chains. Some manufacturing is being reshored or nearshored, moved closer to the markets it serves. This doesn't mean the end of global trade, but it means the relentless optimization for cost efficiency is now being balanced against the need for reliability and redundancy. The box itself will not change. The 20-foot standard is too deeply embedded in global infrastructure to be replaced anytime soon. But the ships that carry it, the ports that handle it, the fuels that power those ships, and the economic logic that decides what goes in the box and where it comes from, all of that is in motion.
Let's come back to the supermarket. You're holding that bottle of Spanish olive oil again. $3. Now you know. That price is not an accident. It is not simply the result of cheap Spanish labor or fertile Andalusian soil. It is the accumulated result of one man waiting by a dock in New Jersey in 1953, of 58 boxes sailing from Newark to Houston in 1956, of a global standard agreed in 1961, of millions of cranes, trucks, ships, and ports, all built around a single measurement: 20 feet. The container is the most important invention most people have never thought about. It is the physical infrastructure of globalization. It is the reason the modern world looks the way it does, costs what it costs, and works the way it works. And it is just a metal box.